Coming up on the Men at the Movies podcast, Britt and I discuss the movie To End All Wars. The POW camp represents the places in our lives where we feel helpless, where injustice occurs. And when that happens, we can respond by our human nature, or we can be empowered by the grace of the gospel. When we experience tragedy, injustice, helplessness, and loss, we find out if the words of Jesus are hyperbole or the true way to find life. Join us as we discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me from way down south in Atlanta, Georgia, Britt Mooney. Hey man, how you doing today?
Way down south.
I'm doing south. Great. It's like 4 hours south.
Way down. That's like Antarctica. That's way down south.
Well, that is way down. That is like you've gone past south back to north. How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. I've had a good day. I've had a daughter with pneumonia this week.
That doesn't sound like good.
It's weird because she's acting like she feels okay, but then she's coughing, and the cough didn't sound great on Sunday night. And anyway, took her to the doctor on Monday, and then she was like, "Yep." The doctor's like, she's got pneumonia. So anyway, she's back at school today.
Oh, nice.
So we're trying out school today. So, but God is good, man. It's what gave me some time with her and working from home and just being with her.
Nice.
And there are opportunities in every situation.
Yeah.
And that's probably what we'll talk about today, although maybe not in a lighthearted way.
No, definitely not a lighthearted movie.
That's part of the gift of the gospel is to see and faith is to see what God is doing in every situation and, join him in it and see the good in it. So, but anyway, it's been a good week. How about you? How are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Getting plans ready for doing some video projects and messing around with ideas and, the stuff of life, taking care of the grandkids, planning, all the things.
Those are some cute pictures, by the way.
Oh, you like
your son,
yeah,
of
check
your
out our
grandson.
Facebook page. Jamie's been doing some posting, and we've got a new technical director because I'm no good.
Technical director.
He's got a big title. His title is taller than he is. So check out our Facebook page. Because I think we're going to be doing some fun stuff. You'll be seeing some fun stuff on there. So definitely check that out. And so today we're talking about a movie from 2001. It's To End All Wars. So the movie is based on the autobiography of Ernest Gordon, who's a kid from Scotland, was in the army in World War II, captured by the Japanese forces and ended up in a POW camp in Cambodia. It's got Kiefer Sutherland in it. It's got Mark Strong, who I was like, oh, I recognize that guy. He's from Merlin and Kingsman movies, and he was in Shazam and Zero Dark 30. Robert Carlyle, who I recognize from The Full Monty, but was also in Trainspotting. It's got Hamish's dad from Braveheart.
Oh yeah,
so it's got a really good cast. And what they're doing is, they're in this POW camp, and they're building a railroad, very similar to the much older movie Bridge Over the River Kwai with Obi-Wan Kenobi in it. It's not the train you're looking for. And so it's about life in this POW camp. It's as we we're not here to critique some of the issues, some of the storytelling, some of the shots in the cinematography. Britt says he would give it a B. I might not give it quite. I might give it a C+. So Britt, why did you pick this movie and say, hey, I want to talk about this movie and expand on this and dig into it here on the podcast?
For me, this movie, while I think it's a little more low budget, and I think they were trying.
Yeah, they ran out of money and had to delay release for some months.
I think they had higher expectations for this movie making it than what happened, and I think they probably had to cut some corners in some places. That's what it looked like to me this last watch through. But man, this movie really impacted me the first time I watched it, because it's, number one, I really dig into war movies, but this movie really asks some very interesting and important questions and doesn't fully answer them. It does. The book probably does, but as a Hollywood type movie, maybe even a B-level, but it's still a Hollywood type movie. I don't know that it doesn't seem like they felt like they could really give it a full gospel gusto. But, are the words of Jesus just hyperbole, or do they mean something? Are they just nice sayings that we can put on our wall while we just live our quiet American life? Or are the sayings of Jesus, do they have value in the most horrific circumstances known to man? Because here's what happens in our modern day culture people look at the most horrific instances of man's inhumanity to man, to use an old phrase, and they say those are reasons why God doesn't exist. And yet here is a movie, and I think there are several stories throughout history that show, can you love your neighbor in an instance like this? And what does that mean to love your neighbor? And I think Jesus came to answer these questions with his own life, and the injustice, the ultimate, like no one has endured more injustice than Jesus. Right? He was the most innocent and was given some of the most horrific punishments in the history of mankind. Like, crucifixion was developed after impalement.
Impaling them isn't brutal enough. Let's find something worse.
Because when you impale somebody, they don't live as long as when you crucify them. Like, so the suffering goes beyond as horrific as impaling somebody. If you don't know what it is, I don't want to describe it necessarily, but as horrific as impaling people were, the Romans and the Greeks a little bit before them were like, we really want to embarrass people and show people that you don't want to mess with us. So let's make it as torturous and long lasting as humanly possible. Or inhumanly possible, I guess. And so Jesus that was the world Jesus lived in. Like, it wasn't just all mega churches and casseroles after the service
and skinny jeans.
Like, he lived in that sort of brutal world. And here we have a movie that asks these questions. And I think and it's a true story. So we're not making it. It's not just a parable. Yeah. It's a true story of someone, and they literally had to go through these questions of, if God is real and the Bible is real, what does it look like to love our neighbor in this and love our enemy in the midst of this horrific situation?
Right. And I want to jump on a couple of things that you said, because that's really where we're going to focus our conversation. But I want to start with what's actually the last probably vocalization in the movie. We've seen Ernie enter the prison camp, and now he's leaving the prison camp with the Allied troops, and he's free, he's rescued. And it narrates basically the purpose of his time at the prison camp.
Who is my neighbor? How many times shall I forgive my brother? What does it mean to love one's enemies? What can a man give in exchange for his soul? These are the questions that I faced in my prison camp. The answers changed my life forever.
I love that question that you asked, Britt. Are Jesus' words hyperbole? Martin Lloyd-Jones, he was a Welsh minister, wrote a book on the Sermon on the Mount. 60 sermons going through the Sermon on the Mount. And so he'd go through, basically line by line, all the words from basically from Matthew. And his point was, these things aren't hard to do. They're not nice sort of platitudes and goals. They are impossible to do unless your life is supernaturally charged. And that's what we see him asking those questions. Who is my neighbor? How many times do I forgive my brother? How do I love my enemy? And our lives, hopefully, aren't as bad as a POW camp in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Hopefully. But our lives are the crucible for testing that, for proving it. And so I want to start, again, we're kind of hodgepodging around, but I think this movie really has some nuggets of challenging questions and thoughts. And one of these is this idea from Plato. And I'm gonna get ready to play the clip, and then we'll talk about it a little bit.
Well, and just before you play the clip, just to dive real quickly into what you said, every one of us deals with brokenness. Every one of us deals with betrayal. Every one of us deals with persecution or discrimination, or every one of us deals with something, because we live in a world that's hopeless, that has no hope. And it may not be this extreme, but we all feel the hopelessness to some degree. I don't care if you're in suburbia. I don't care if you're in the inner city, or I don't care. If you're human, you feel that pull of hopelessness. It's like we're stuck in this life. It's like we're stuck in this meaningless existence. And it doesn't matter how many cars and things and planes. It doesn't matter what you have. You're going to feel this way to some degree. And that's why these 4 responses we go through are so important. It's because you may not, like you said, you may not be, hopefully you're not in Thailand or wherever in this awful prison camp. Yeah. No, we don't want anyone to be there. But at the same time, God allows us to go through these experiences to shape the faith that he's given us and to lead us in those, what the right response should be, Because this movie is about hope. How do you hold on to hope? And even Paul talks about Christ in you is the hope of glory. Really, our biggest testimony is, how do we have hope in a world that's really attacks our hope, attacks it, and wants us to turn towards hopelessness or striving or all these other things. So we're going to talk about those responses to this. But first, I want to set up this scene. Ernie, who's the main character, he wanted to be a teacher before the war. And so he's been asked to start teaching some of the guys, some of the soldiers, some of the other prisoners, because they want to be prepared. They want to engage their minds. They want to grow and develop. And so he starts teaching, and he teaches them from Plato. Somehow I don't know how they got some literary, some they
books.
never explain that.
They have a Bible. They have Plato's Republic, apparently. They don't have any Shakespeare or bagpipes. They have set up bagpipes. I'm like, how do you have bagpipes? Anyway, so this is a very quick discussion between Ernie, who's sort of explaining about what Plato says about a truly righteous, a truly just man, and the response from his major, who is going to be one of the other responses that we have to deal with. How do we deal with hope? Are the words of Jesus mere hyperbole? But this conversation sets the stage for where we're going to go with this movie.
What will happen to the just man should he enter this world? Well, the just man will be scourged, racked, chained, and after every kind of misery, he will be crucified on a pole for all to see. Any questions?
I've got a question. My question: if the just man is treated as you say, then what's the just response? roll over and let evil have its wicked way.
What would you recommend, Major?
I'd recommend defiance. Justice for the captors, an eye for an eye.
At what price mercy?
Mercy. The last bastion of traitors and cowards.
So you would take a man and crucify him on a pole for all to see?
I would seek justice.
And that's a really, really rich conversation because, Plato, he talks about some big ideas. So that triggered a thought of,
the Republic, our whole government system is based on it. That guy.
Plato's kind of important. So this stuff, and it was interesting because this was written about 400 years before Christ. And Plato really writes about conversations that he has with other, this was basically Men at the Movies was basically what the Republic is. They're conversations about big ideas and hypotheticals and stories. And
yeah, you and I should wear togas next time, but we do this. We should wear togas.
Sweet. Well, you wear a toga, I'll wear a kilt. How about that? So there's a couple sections in this book in the Republic, this section that he's writing. And the first section is a man truly just, or does he just appear just? And what he talks about is a shepherd finds a magic ring that makes him invisible. And before finding the ring, the shepherd was a righteous and just man. However, after he has the ring, the fear of punishment is gone. And so he seduces the king's wife, eventually kills the king so that he can take whatever he wants. And his point was that no one is just of his own will, but only from constraint, in the belief that justice is not his personal good, inasmuch as every man, when he supposes himself to have the power to do wrong, does wrong. So and that's what we see with the captors in this camp of there's no constraint on their behavior and they do horrific things. But you see sort of the same thing in some of the prisoners in their response of if they can get away with it, they will do it. So this next conversation, it's interesting. It talks about it's by constraint. We're basically just because we fear the consequences of not being just or righteous. Righteousness must be produced under compulsion or force, since no one will be righteous of his own accord. I feel like that's scriptural somewhere. So this is the part that Ernie was talking about, this next section. To test whether a just or righteous man is truly just or righteous, everything of value will be stripped from him. His life will be taken from him in the cruelest of manners to see if he can remain righteous until the end. After all, if he had good things in life, perhaps he was righteous in order to have the good things. Like it benefits you to be right and just. The only way to test his righteousness is to give this man every injustice the world can inflict. We can, and what actually Plato, the official words, we cannot be sure in that case whether he is just for justice's sake or for the sake of the gifts and honors. So we must strip him bare of everything but justice. So even for Plato, Paul talks about the cross being a foolishness. For Plato, it's still foolish because what he says, it is stupid to be just. It is stupid to be righteous. Our goal should be to appear just and righteous because that's where the greatest benefit comes from.
I'm trying to remember exactly how he puts it, but, I don't want to trigger anybody, but I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson, and in his conversation with Joe Rogan on Rogan's podcast, he talks about the crucifixion, and he talks about the crucifixion as the ultimate tragedy because, and I'm kind of using my words, but basically every injustice was done upon Jesus. Like in the crucifixion narrative, he was betrayed, he was beaten, he was completely innocent, he had only done good. And I mean, like he was betrayed by friends, by family. He was abandoned. He was abused by the government, by religion, by family. Like he was like on and on and on and on and on, all the different ways that Jesus, suffered injustice was literally every way that we suffer injustice. Like it was in every way anybody could. And so, yes, the cross is foolishness, right? It's a stumbling block to the Jews, and it's foolishness to the Greeks. Now, I don't know if Paul was specifically speaking about Plato, although he possibly could have been.
Sounds right.
So I don't know if he was specifically talking about Plato, but he was talking about the general philosophical belief. But remember that this is all the law did. So the first revelation of God to mankind after the fall was law. Well, that's the first covenant. Well, that's not as true. But anyway, the Mosaic law was essentially, it was a management with punishment and rewards of the sin nature. It did not change the sin nature. It did not turn sinful people into righteous ones. All it did was manage the sin, right? It was just sin management. Yeah. Like there was no transformation of people. It was just managing, and that's why,
because it's external.
It was external, and that's what
the law is focused on external.
That's right,
things.
And that's why it failed. And Plato is pointing this out, and this is what Jesus points out later when he says, "You wash the outside of the cup, but who's going to drink out of a cup that's got lipstick on the inside?" Like this is
little stuck on morsels
like
left in there.
You're not going to drink out of that cup. Like we know it's tainted, and yet we live in a world where, man, and social media is the worst. Like we put up there the best that we know how, there are literal filters to make you look younger and thinner and have no lines on your face. And, but again, whatever people,
I do the old man filter and it's just, me.
Right. Yeah. I've got the holy crap, this is what I saw in the mirror this morning filter on. But that's human nature. I mean, it's social media is just amplifying human nature. It's not doing anything on its own. Mm-hmm. And so, but what Jesus did was he came in to give a different way. And we can talk a lot more about that, and we could probably also find all four of these examples in the Gospels of how people react, to the injustice of this world.
I love that idea that, again, you said it's human nature, right? We can't change our nature on our own. And that's what, I mean, that's a lot of what Plato was talking about. It's like, nobody's going to do this because you can't. And the only way that you can test somebody's, their authenticity of who they are is by experiencing injustice, is by losing things and heartbreak. And just a couple of weeks ago, one of the men who's been involved in, like, I have a group of close friends here, and this guy was involved, like, spiritually transformational points in their lives over the last decade. And several years ago, he lost his wife to cancer. And just a couple of weeks ago, we found out he lost his son. That his oldest son died. Mm. And we found this out when we were actually meeting together, and that whole group just sort of went silent because, like, oh my gosh, we know how he experienced the loss of his wife, and our heart breaks for him. And one of my friends, he's like, I'm really ticked off right now, God. As we were praying, he's like, I'm ticked off. Because we have a human nature response. And again, going back to are the words of Jesus hyperbole? Because there is a better way. And that's what I think this movie is positing and showing. Because, as it says in the New Testament, we don't have a high priest. We don't have a savior who was unable to compassion. He knows what we've been through. He's been tempted just like we have been, but he lived without sin. He was a truly just, a truly righteous, truly whole person. And our challenge is to model after that, which is impossible in our human nature, but only possible through the supernatural transformation.
As we get into these four responses, I think it's also important that we define the two different ideas of justice that are happening. Okay, there are two different. God has a different idea of justice than this world does. This world, because this is all it knows and this is all it has power to do. All this world knows to do with justice is to do an eye for an eye. That's all it knows to do. That was pretty much, I mean, there was a lot of good stuff in the law that was very symbolic of Christ and what was to come in the new covenant. But in the law, it was like, if your neighbor, if you accidentally kill your neighbor's cow, you owe him a cow. Like there's an equal exchange of property and an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And if you kill someone, then you die. Like there's this, that's all the world has apart from heaven. That's all the world knows. And so without that greater revelation, all you're going to have is those three responses. The only way you have a fourth response that Dusty gives us is if you realize God's idea of justice is different, is not punitive, it's redemptive. God's idea of justice is returning all of creation back to the way he created it to be. And you don't punish people into that, you redeem and transform them into that. And that's a different process. That takes forgiveness, and that takes grace, and that takes power, and that takes generosity, and that takes all sorts of things that aren't hyperbole. But if you don't understand the difference between those two ideas of justice, that what God's after is not to punish bad people, he's out to redeem them. And he will punish bad people, but that's not his ultimate goal. His ultimate goal is to redeem them, and he won't force redemption on anyone. So if you choose, like I was watching Return of the King, and Gollum holds on to the ring.
Right.
But the ring's going in the fire, dude. If you can hold on to the ring and he won't make you let it go. You're going to have to choose to do it, to let it go. But if you hold on to the ring is headed to destruction, and he'll let you go there. But my point is his idea of justice, because he saw what he created and he saw that it was good, and he wants to get back to that. He wants us to get back to those ideas of that we see. And it's not a new Eden, it's a new heaven and a new earth. And we can talk a lot about that, but that's where we see the two different attitudes. Those are the two main different attitudes. And we see three responses, but they're really based on the same lie, as it were, of what justice really is.
Right. There's three human natures, human nature responses.
Right.
And the sad part is, in a lot of ways, I think the Major, his response can be covered up as a supernatural response. I am seeking justice, and I am seeking revenge, and I am seeking an eye for an eye. And I am not diminishing any social justice movements. We are not saying, the things to prevent human trafficking, to reduce slavery in the world.
Right.
Those are really good things. But what we're talking about more is a personal response. How do we respond when tragedy happens, when heartbreak happens, when brokenness happens? And the purpose is for us to respond less and less to our human nature and more to the supernatural nature, right? The renewing of your mind that Paul talks about. So the first one we see is the majority of the guys there in the camp. They have given up. They have no hope. They have dead eyes. They barely have one dude in one of the scenes didn't even have any clothes on. He's just his butt wandering through the railroad building. And they've given up. And there's a line about the danger of losing hope and what happens when you don't have hope but it's before Ernie starts teaching because he's on the verge of losing hope. He's got some guys that come up, Ernie does, and they're like, hey, I heard you wanted to be a teacher. We'd love to be taught. And he's there basically recovering. He almost died. They actually put him in the tent of the dead, and he recovered. And he says, just leave me alone. And then Dusty has some words for him. Again, Dusty is the voice of transformation in this movie.
Yeah.
And so what he says, I think, is a lesson for us about the danger and what happens when we do lose hope and when we give up.
You said you wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah.
We thought that you might have some answers, sir.
Would you like me to take a lecture on the meaning of life?
That's a bloody fine idea, sir.
Please. Just leave me alone.
That's what I figured.
You know, a man can experience an incredible amount of pain and suffering if he has hope. When he loses his hope, that's when he dies.
With these three responses, the essential lie is they don't know what justice really is to God. They have sometimes we have our own idea of justice. And that's why people, again, God does not dismiss pain. He's not insensitive to pain. He weeps with us. He tells us to weep with those who weep. We should, like, he is there with us in pain. But a lot of times when people see God allowed this awful thing to happen, then he can't be good. But that is still based on an exchange idea of justice. It's not based on a redemptive idea of justice. It's based on an exchange idea of justice. And so I didn't deserve this. I lived a good life. I've never hurt anybody. And then this person dies in a car wreck and I didn't deserve, that's a tragedy.
And they go bankrupt.
It is a tragedy. Yeah. I lost my job. I've worked hard the whole time. I've been betrayed. I didn't deserve this. And so people respond out of these three responses, and there's probably, infinite variations.
Think of them as umbrellas. Yeah. They're gray. They're shades within the colors. But these three,
we could probably summarize 99% of people's hopeless responses in one of these three. Ian, the major, Yanker, or the guy that we can call the Shakespeare dude. I forget his name. Oh, and if you read Viktor Frankl's, what's that, Man's Search for Meaning? He talks a lot about this too. But those three are umbrellas of the types of responses that we see. But here's the thing. I'm with you, man. We should stand against racism. We should stand against all of those things. But I'm telling you, there was a difference between what Martin Luther King Jr. said and how he approached it with a very kingdom-minded response, standing against what was wrong. He never excused wrong, but he was never going to demonize white people either. Right? Because he realized that the enemy in this thing was not white people. Racism was wrong. We should stand up for it. But that's not all of the social justice movement, because you don't fix injustice with more injustice. You don't fix brokenness with more brokenness. You don't fix lies with more lies. You got to attack this stuff with the truth. And so therefore, these three guys, it's Ian, right? The major. And then you have Yanker, the Kiefer Sutherland character.
He's a Yankee who's a wanker.
He's a Yankee who's a wanker. And then you also have the Shakespeare guy, the Bard dude. And if you read a lot of this material about stuff that happens in concentration camps, this is what you see. But this is life. It's just human nature. Either you decide to fight back defiantly, you are just going to be a wrench in the works, man, you are just going to be, and if you've never known
fly in the ointment,
if you've
monkey
never
in the wrench.
if you've never known anybody like this, I bet you probably have. I bet we have all met somebody who's.
Then you're probably the one.
You might be. That is probably you, where you're angry at the world, where you're just angry all the time. You're just angry at people. You just and every injustice is just throws you off, and it's just you're just angry, and you got to make people pay. And these are the people who post online about. I hope those people who didn't take the vaccine die. And you're like, what the heck, man? Like, whoa. Because they're trying to manufacture an idea of fairness and justice that doesn't exist.
Well, and I just want to reset the context, because the POW camps represent a place where we feel powerless. And so much of life, we feel powerless. Which can turn to hopeless, which can turn to helpless, which can turn to hopeless. And that's what you see in this guy's reaction. It's like, what about defiance? Right? Going back to the Major's response of, it's like, we're just supposed to roll over and let the evil have its way. It's like, I vote for defiance.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the way, like you were saying, because it's easy to say, oh yeah, this is a POW camp. Nobody's living in a concentration camp these days. And yet there's things where we feel powerless. And how do you respond when you do feel powerless and helpless against whatever's happening?
Exactly. And again, wanting to get involved in an issue that isn't right, that's not the problem. Okay. Yeah. Let's just make that clear. And sometimes you can have a certain calling because of something that you've gone through. Your child died from a drunk driver or something like that. And you want to help keep those people off the streets or whatever, whatever the thing is. Like, that doesn't mean that you can't get involved in causes, but what it means is the Bible's clear. People aren't my enemy. I'm not saying people shouldn't go to jail or anything like that in the system. I'm just saying people aren't the enemy. And that's part of what they had to learn in this thing. That's the fourth, choice. It doesn't excuse what people did, and it didn't mean what they did was right. But here he becomes, I don't know if we said it before or during, like, at what point do you become the monster you're fighting in order to kill the monster? Yeah. And you've still failed to win at that moment. And we see some of that, especially towards the end of this movie, of fighting against this idea of becoming the very monster. If what they did was wrong, me doing it doesn't now make it right, Right. And so it doesn't prove that I think it's even wrong, or it just means I'm wrong now too. It's okay to be wrong, but that's a hopelessness coming from a lie of injustice. And then you have other people who are like, well, I'm not going to, if this is the system, I'm going to manipulate the system and get as much as I freaking can out of the system. Then that's my response. I'm going to accumulate as much as I possibly can and do as much and get material wealth as much as I possibly can.
Well, really, he's seeking comfort. He's, he made rice wine to numb and this is Kiefer Sutherland's character. He made rice wine. He's making deals. He's like 2 cigarettes per sip of the rice wine to make you forget your sorrows, to turn you numb.
Yeah. That's what he says. He says, I got numbness for you. Right.
You want to escape? Here's how. And that's super easy for us these days.
Yeah.
To lose ourselves, to hit a couple stronger beers on the way home, to lose an hour of your time scrolling through Facebook or Instagram.
Right. I was just looking obnoxiously at my own phone. At my new obnoxiously large phone that
Britt
they convinced me to get.
iPhone 4.
This is This is the iPhone 14 Plus, and I got it because it has more memory, but it's obnoxiously large, and I'm regretting it. Anyway,
you need to take your pants to a tailor to get bigger pockets.
I need.
Because you can't be the guy clipping it on your belt.
No, I'm going to get a fanny pack.
Actually, those are coming back. So
I know. My daughter loves her fanny pack. She is all about the fanny pack, and I'm in.
So we've got the Major, right? His response is defiance, eye for an eye. When the liberators come, he's not happy to find freedom. He is out to antagonize his captor.
Yes.
And he is doing all the things that they did.
Yes, so good.
He wants to hold them accountable. He's driven by anger and rage.
No, you got to dig more into that. His anger was so great. What could he not enjoy?
Freedom.
That's so beautiful. I love that.
And even before that, when they're talking about escaping, they're not talking about escaping. Like his goal was to take over control of the prison camp, but they're in the middle of the jungle. There's nowhere to go. And Ernie pointed out, he said, if you do this, we're going to get a regiment of Japanese soldiers and we will be wiped out. He's like, yes, that is preferable.
Yeah.
Right. At least having that little bit of power and dying on top is better than living without power, with being helpless and being hopeless.
Yeah. And here's the thing. This is so good, man, because basically what was his goal? His goal wasn't even freedom. It was to change who had control.
Right.
And that's not freedom because
you're both still in chains. You're just changing the position.
Here, we haven't done Return of the King yet, but the theme of Return of the King is power over others is evil. No one was meant to have power over other people. There's a whole scene in the book that's not in the movie of Return of the King when Aragorn leads people from Minas Tirith, and they just beat the armies of Sauron and Minas Tirith and the Pelennor fields and the blah 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 blah. They didn't show this in the movie because it was already
4 hours long.
But in the book, it was a long, arduous journey to get to the Black Gate, and a lot of people were getting ready to quit. And he turns to him, he says, "I can't ask you to go any further. If you want to go, go." And there were a few, and most of them, some people did leave, but there were a lot of people who stayed inspired by his speech or whatever, But my point is, we weren't meant to have power over anyone, not really over ourselves. Just be honest. We weren't given the ability to have power over anything. And so therefore he couldn't even enjoy the real freedom when it was happening in front of him.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's intense. And how many times has it happened to us too?
We don't enjoy the freedom because we're too focused on what was.
We can't enjoy the good things and the freedoms that God is giving us because we're like, no, but if I were in charge.
Yeah. This wouldn't have happened in the first place. So that's the one. And then we've got you've mentioned the guy who was a Shakespeare teacher. He taught at Cambridge, and he was to the point where they came up, that his platoon sergeant came up and said, "Can we teach? He needs something to keep him alive." That point where you're checked out, you've given up, you're just sort of zombie walking through the day, you're hopeless. And as Dusty has said, when you lose your hope, you're dead. You're dead already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is it? Hang on. Let me look up. There's a quote.
Well, while you're looking this up, Viktor Frankl talks about this in his book, that there were some people that would throw themselves at the electric fence to kill themselves on purpose, because in that hopelessness, they just decide to check out. And you can check out with the phone that I just talked about. You can check out with Netflix. You can check out in a lot of different ways and just check out of life, right? Or like Yanker did, you're just trying to please yourself, which is where we are most of the time in our culture these days. There's a lot of pleasure of the flesh. Like if it feels good, it is good.
Yeah.
And you don't have the right to tell me I can't do it. This is who I am, sort of thing, which leads to its own problems, right, as we saw in the movie. Did you find the quote? It's
Albert Schweitzer, and he says, "The tragedy of life is what dies inside a man while he lives." And that's what you see is, the prisoners walking around with blank stares. They stop taking care of themselves. They're not washing. They're not doing anything other than going through the motions. And again, that's our human nature. We can respond to defiance. We can respond by becoming a doormat. We can respond like Yanker, search for comfort, accumulation, achievement, the things of this world, whatever that might be. But there is a fourth way. But I think those three ways are our human nature. Mm-hmm. The fourth way, and that's what we see in Dusty throughout this movie. And Dusty's story is powerful. And there's a scene where Ernie asks him, he's like, "What are you doing here? You don't seem to be, you don't fit." And what it was, in his youth, he got in a fight with someone and left the man paralyzed. And at that point in the story, you're like, oh, well, your punishment was you can go to jail or you can go in the army. But no, he said the guy didn't press charges. He said, "I've been forgiven a debt, and so I'm going to forgive you." He said, your punishment, he gave him a Bible. Your punishment is to read the Bible. And so that idea, that fourth response is one that doesn't make sense. It's one that turns the words of Jesus from hyperbole to a way of life. Because in those first three human nature versions, we can't do it in our own strength. Even if we wanted to, we can't. But in the fourth, when we access the supernatural power of Christ, the transforming power of the gospel, our chains don't matter. Right? Yeah. And that's what we see in that scene towards the end where these Japanese soldiers pull up. They are labeled cowards because they left their post because they've been bombed by the Allies, and they're dead, they're dying, they're wounded. They're in this truck. So the prison guards say, "No, you're traitors basically to the emperor." And Ernie goes, even though the major says, "Don't you provide comfort? Don't you provide care and comfort to the enemy?" Mm-hmm. He's like, "That truck is full of human beings who are dying and wounded. They are no threat."
I've been all three of those human nature people in my life.
Right.
I just want to let everybody know, like I've at least tried for a day. I've been those people. I've been those people where I at least had the thought and I at least had the unction that that's it. I'm going to kill these guys. I'm going to beat these people silly. They deserve it. Sometimes it happens on the road. They cut me off. I'm going to go cut them off. I'm going
to strangle my kids.
and I've been the person who was like, why am I trying to do any good here in life? I just keep getting screwed over. I just want to get a job. Maybe I'll play the lottery. Maybe if I have enough money, I'll be happy.
I don't want to ride anymore. That's hard.
I don't want. This is so hard. If I just had enough money, it wouldn't be so difficult. Of course, there's all sorts of history that shows us that that's stupid. And then there's also the times of like, I just want to check out. I just want to lay down. I don't want anybody to talk to me. I just want to just totally check out. I've been all those people. And just to acknowledge with people and, just kind of let people know, like, you're not alone when you have those thoughts. And one of the moments that I like was there toward the end when the major is about to torture and kill the Japanese kind of officer guy that was the main antagonist. Is Ernie looks at him and he goes, "You don't think I want to too?" Like, it's not that I don't want to do this. It's that I have to make a conscious choice to know that ultimately in a grander in a grander transformative scheme, this isn't right. Like, yes, he deserves it. Yes, I want to do it. And yet it's not right. It's not right for me to do it or for you to do it. And he's trying to call the Major to redemption in that moment, call him away from anger, call him to freedom, because of what it would do to his own soul. Right. But my point is that we all have to make those conscious decisions, because we are all going to have the moment of reaction of one of those three. We're all going to do it. It's always going to happen. But we have to make a conscious, intentional thought that says, okay, God, what's real here? How do you want me to react? And he's going to have you love people. Now, that doesn't mean letting them do whatever they want, or not give people boundaries, or not stand up for what's right. But what that means is it might look differently than those other three. Right. And for Dusty, like what I love about the movie is that he's not the main character. Like, his introduction is he's the one who knows Japanese. He's learned their language. He knows the culture. He's actually seen these awful, awful people as human beings because of his different perspective, and therefore can communicate with them in such a way that doesn't the Major call him a Jap lover or whatever? You're a Jap lover or whatever. It's like, well, yeah, he actually is. He does love them, but he's not one of the enemy, but he's not really one of you either. If you're going to do this, I kind of like that introduction in the beginning, because you don't really know what this guy's deal is, because he might have been one of the guys who makes deals with the guards so he can get something out of it and betrays his friends or whatever. He could have been one of those guys. But as the movie goes on, you see that this guy has integrity. This guy has compassion and generosity and all of those things.
And he even, at the end, the Major betrayed him, turned them in for doing the school, turned in Yanker, because he considered them threats. So he was the traitor, even though he was accusing them of befriending the enemy. He's the one who actually betrayed his friends.
Yeah.
And yet, Dusty, as the Major was about to be killed after their failed takeover attempt, he went and we don't know what he said. We don't know the words. All we know is Dusty gets killed and the Major goes free.
In some way offers himself instead. Yeah, right.
And so that takes me, that sort of brings us to the big conclusion, right? When we look at why does this happen? Why is there suffering? It goes back to that first question. And I think we need to ask that in our own lives. Are the words of Jesus hyperbole, or are they truth? Because what you see, we have that human nature that responds, that wants to, waterboard the captors and do all the things, that wants to respond, getting drunk, losing ourselves in our job, all the responses that we think will provide life. But I go back to Plato's words. The only way to test righteousness is to give this man every injustice the world can inflict. And that's what we see in this movie is, who does Ernie become through these injustices, through the things he has to endure? The only way to test our faith in the words of Jesus. They sound great on a Sunday morning when we're surrounded by friends and everybody's happy and you're eating fine. The only way to test our beliefs, the rubber meets the road, is when the tragedy happens, when the stuff happens, right? When the death occurs, when the job loss occurs, when the crisis happens, when you feel powerless and helpless. What nature are you going to allow to rule you? Are you going to be ruled by the human nature, or are you going to be ruled by the supernatural nature? 1 Peter 3:9 says, do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing.
You don't return. You love those who hate you. Like Jesus says, even the Gentiles
It's easy
do this.
to love a friend.
You can love someone's loving you, love them back.
Yeah.
But the only way you're testing of righteousness is if you get evil and don't repay it. So that means you're going to get evil. That means God's going to allow you to be tested with getting evil so that you can prove the righteousness that is within. Because like Jesus said, like everybody loves people who loves them. Like you'd have to be a complete jerk not to love people who love you back. But what about the people who don't love you? What about the people who speak evil of you and betray you and all of these things? Like, and I love that in 1 Peter there, he actually uses the word repay. Oh, they deserve it. But thank God, God didn't give me what I deserved. He didn't give me what I deserved either.
Right.
And that's where Dusty's coming from. And, you know, the other place that this is coming from in that verse in 1 Peter is that I know I'm not just repaying a blessing because I want to be a doormat or I'm trying to be nice. I know that God will bless me. I know that God is going to be up there going, I got you.
Right.
He's going to fight for me. And that's what Dusty knows. Even though he suffers a horrendous death, he knows that there's a life beyond this one. And I love that sort of element in the movie too, where towards the end of the movie, last third, you know, the planes are going overhead. Like they're so isolated. It's like there's no hope. There's nowhere to go. And all of a sudden you get these little hints that, oh, we might be
freedom is coming.
Wait, you know, the tide might be turning. And even then your character is tested because that's when Ernie stands up and he has chosen the fourth way. He has chosen Dusty's way. And he's like, look, I'm going to help these people. You do with me what you want, but I'm going to help them because they are human beings and they can't hurt me.
What can man do to the body, right? Be more concerned about the ones who have control over the soul. Man can only touch the body.
Right. And I love the little scene there at the end where he meets with there's a Japanese interpreter who's kind of like the one nice Japanese guy and kind of the whole thing. But you know, where they have a meeting there, it's a real life meeting, and they have a little meeting there at the end. And it had been how many ever years, 50 years or something since the realizing that this was an awful time and reconnecting after all those years. And I think it said that the Japanese guy had become a Buddhist monk or something, priest or something. So they had both gone on to some level of spirituality and of realizing there's something more important to life than what we do to each other, you know, or at least because there's a different life that should inform how we treat one another. Because there's something else, because there's value to all human beings that should inform how we treat one another, not simply let me repay what you've done to me. Because as Gandhi said, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. And at some point, there has to be grace. And if there's going to be redemption and community and all of those things that we want. And I just want to encourage people that we all have the responses, but man, God can give you really creative ways to stand up for what's right without treating other people like an enemy. If you'll just listen and rest in him and realize you've already won, realize he's weeping with you when people betray you and do awful things. He's there. He's not saying it's right, but he's after a greater redemption. And when you have moments like, I forget, was it in South Carolina where that young white man went in and shot up a black church, and some of the family members and church members got on TV and forgave him. They're not saying he shouldn't go to jail. They were just saying, we forgive you.
It's not even saying he's asking for it. right? Sometimes it's the hardest people to forgive are the ones who don't even ask for it.
But they were doing it because it was the right thing to do, and it was revealing something more powerful. It's a powerful moment. If you've never seen the video where because they're grieving, but they're not going to hold on to hate and anger, and because they know that's going to kill their own soul at the very least. There's no hope in the other three ways. The hope is in if I'm acting as if there's this other world, as if there's this other reality, that God is real and God loves them as much as he loves me. And that doesn't make what they do right, but how I treat them in the middle of this is important. And even Jesus said, forgive them. They don't know what they do. They don't really know what they're doing.
Because that was the test of a righteous man. Can you still say that even when we've stripped everything away? And Joseph didn't say what you did was good. He said, you meant it for evil. God used it for good. He didn't relabel it. He called it evil. The question, when these things happen, are the words of Jesus just hyperbole, or are they truth that we can live in through accessing the power of grace and mercy? What value mercy, right? Wasn't that the question?
Yeah.
We didn't even dive into that, but it's priceless, right? So hope you guys enjoyed this dive into To End All Wars. Check it out it was on Amazon Prime, or read the book if you guys are into that sort of thing. And
can we do a comedy next after this one?
Yeah, for sure. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?